Welcome. Thanks for coming on. I'm looking forward to having you there. How are things up in, you said 10 Sleep, right? That's where you're at?
Yeah, we're in Ten Sleep, Wyoming.
Yeah,
It's
from,
we're kind of in the season that it goes from cold to warm to mud to snow. So you just get there's a lot of diversity in our weather right now.
and I'm sure everybody has been to 10 Sleep or knows where it is. Probably no one's ever heard of it before outside of, if somebody's lived up around there. I actually lived in Wyoming for 5 years and I'd never heard of 10 Sleep. So it's up kind of north central, I guess. I would guess just a little bit west of Cody,
Yeah,
I think, if I'm not mistaken, as we kind of chatted
yeah,
about that.
we're
Anyway,
kind of in
it's
the middle,
middle
and
middle,
and
middle
we
of nowhere, but a nice area. I think you said is it super windy or not so bad up there?
you know in the no, it's we're not like Casper, Wyoming. I mean, we just like the last 2 days have been pretty windy. In fact, in Laramie, it was blowing trailer houses over, and you know
Yeah,
they're
and like I
very,
said, when I
but
lived in Cheyenne, it was that same thing. It was Casper, Cheyenne, Laramie. It was always high wind warnings and trailers being blown off the road, tractor trailers, and just not a nice place to live as far as the weather is concerned. But so, just by way of background, can you give the folks aren't familiar with you, and probably no one here's been familiar with you yet, your background, if you don't mind?
yeah, I'm kind of a lifelong rancher. Was born into it, as was my dad and his dad. And I went to college at the University of Wyoming. Um, Learned how to learn. I didn't learn a whole lot. I was kind of majored in. I was looking to be a veterinarian, but 4 more years, and I couldn't take it. So I came back to the ranch, and I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get kind of get us up to production. So I I took all the money that we were making at the time and just invested it back in the ranch because I wanted to approach the ranching from an aspect of I wanted the land to work for me more than me working for it, because it's hard, man. I mean, it's you see these old men and they're just, it digging post holes is physically tough on bodies. So, we got our pivots in and started getting our grass production up. And at that point in time, I was really, kind of just going with the flow of what everybody else had been doing, the neighbors and everybody, the commodity norm. And, we installed a bunch of pivots. We're blessed with having some really amazing water out here. We've got artesian water, and it without pumps, it just flows out of the ground. So we harnessed all that and got our infrastructure in place. And kind of the next move was, well, I need to start planting corn. And and then I don't like uh, I don't like sitting in tractors. I don't like hydraulic fluid. So I started kind of researching and looking around and got turned on to like Alan Savory and Joel Salatin, and really was just kind of introduced to this like whole other concept of more of a holistic way of approaching it. So we started going down that path and really, improving our soils, and getting away from monocrops and the pesticides and the herbicides and all these things that are just kind of the status quo when it comes to the farming and the ranching industry. So yeah, we did that, and married to my wife, who was raised here. Went out and traveled a little bit, and I ended up marrying a girl from Tent Sleep, who's also a life. Her family's ranchers. We got 3 little boys, so we're busy.
Yeah, and one thing that we should, I guess, let folks know you and I chatted on the phone for quite a while a few weeks back, and you had some interesting stuff. And so one of the things that you've kind of done, and one of the with this sort of Alan Savory style regenerative agriculture, is you tend to raise older animals, and you keep the animals longer, and that provides a different quality of meat. One of the knocks always on grass finished beef is it's too lean, or it's not. It just takes longer to produce the fatty and the marbling. And so I've actually had opportunity now to try some of your meat. Now, if I can confirm that it's very good. It's very delicious. It's kind of weird. It reminds me, it's kind of interesting is I've I mean, I eat a lot of meat, and so different, I can now start to tell, meat from different places. Like I said, this is this, I can identify it by taste, and yours had a unique taste. It kind of reminded me a little bit of something. There's another company that sometimes I have meat from called Colorado Craft that had a very similar flavor profile. It wasn't quite exactly the same, but it was like within that sort of realm. It's kind of like I'm becoming like like a beef connoisseur snob type of thing, where he's got, this has subtle hints of this and that type of stuff. But talk about the desire to raise these cattle to longer age and older cattle. What do you feel the benefit of that is?
I mean, we kind of stumbled onto it by accident. I work with a guy by the name of Nate Singer, at the time he was working in Boulder. Anybody who's been to Boulder and been to Black Belly, he started their whole animal butchery. So, just a kind of little background is like 8-9 years ago, we started trying to insulate ourselves from this commodity market, because we weren't making it, as with most ranchers in the United States right now. It's just you get the price that you're given, and so there's really one option. So we're like, all right, let's we got to do something different here. So my younger brother is a professional snowboarder, and he spends his winters in Jackson Hole, knows all these chefs, and they're like, hey, let's try your meat. They loved it. So here we go. We start a meat company. And at that point in time, we were just doing what everybody else was doing, feeding corn finish, grain to animals, and corn finish beef. And, that was working. But then as it kind of evolved, and we learned more about meat and working closely with Nate and really getting into the animals, I mean, it was just peeling back layers of the onion and really learning that every animal is different, and what we're doing, the system we have now tries to put everything into the same box, the same size ribeye. And the reality is that everything's different. So we run on my dad's got a big permit in the southern part of the state. It's pretty cool. It's like 320 square miles with one fence around the outside. So we'll go down and gather these thousands of cows up. And as we're going along, we're looking, and I'm identifying that it's like these certain animals. So they're they're basically cows that have been in a cow-calf production. And something happens, maybe their calf dies in the spring. So these animals have spent the entire summer out just harvesting the grasses of the land, and they look like a finished beef. So I talked to Nate, and he's like, man, let's try them. So we took 9 down, and what we found was really just profound. It went against everything that we've been taught. I'm a rancher first, and these older animals are looked at as, a cull cow. And in fact, they deduct the value of that animal it's a salvage animal. They don't give you anything for it. And what we found was this is actually the best meat we've ever had. It was better than our, younger animals. And they had a tremendous amount of fat, tremendous amount of marbling. Because when you think about it, you think about teenagers, and when you're physically growing structurally, it's really hard for you to pack on a bunch of fat unless you're eating a bunch of processed stuff. So that's kind of the same in the beef industry. But once you hit a certain age, it's easy to gain weight. And so once we let these animals reach structural maturity, which is about 4 years old, then all of a sudden they were able to put on a tremendous amount of fat by eating grass. And so it's been a really interesting thing, because my dad, he's a cattleman. I mean, he's bought, sold trade cattle all across the United States. And when we approach him with this idea, he's like, nah, he talked to his buddies and whatever in the industry, and there's that's just not so. And we proved him wrong, on so many different levels. So it's kind of cool, because we're adding value to animals that really didn't have any value. And in the ranching industry, that's so important, because it's really tough. It's really tough to make it right now.
Just yeah, and some people may not be familiar with the term commodity beef. Can you further describe what that means actually for the layman that doesn't really understand some of the ranching nuances?
Yeah. Um, so commodity beef is like, that's kind of the system that agriculture, ranching industry operates under is, you've got different stages of production. The first stage would be like what we historically have done. So we have mama cows and they have babies. And so the babies are with their mama living wild, out on the range. And then they move on, like in the fall, that's when we wean them. So we take them off of their moms and then we would sell them and they would go on to the next stage of production. They would the big ones would go into feedlots. The smaller ones would move out to like Kansas where there's grass and go into a stocker operation. But really just there's different stages to keep them going. So the commodity industry, it's really interesting because as a rancher, you get one paycheck a year, and that's when you sell your animal. And it's very hard because there's no stability in the market. So when and most ranchers, like if you're not set up to hold on to those animals for an extended period of time and have the feed and have the facilities to take care of them, when you wean those calves, like you have to sell them. And so the markets, they just historically since 2015, it's just been this downward spiral that nobody's making any profit. And like that's kind of the bigger question that we have here is like, well, why is that? Like, what is going on? And when you start to like educate yourself about it, what you find is that there's been this giant centralization of not only the meat packing industry, but the food industry in general, to the point where right now, 86% of the meat packing industry is controlled by like 4 different companies. And it's very questionable, whose best interest they have whose best interest they have here. Is it theirs or is it the rancher? And it just seems to me like they're not supporting the ranchers or the farmers, because it's really the same thing. And just with the legislation, you have these global companies that are running it. 2 of the major 4 they're not even US companies. One of them, these guys, they got out of prison a couple of years ago because they'd been convicted of bribing 1,800 elected officials in Brazil. And they're a major player in the US beef industry, and they dictate what price you get and they dictate what the consumer pays. And it's just, I'm not buying it, because we see what happens, with there was an issue back east. We had a packing plant, one of the large packing plants caught on fire. And the story was, well, that, it's shut down. We can't do anything for, 8 months. And then what happened was the price of live cattle just dropped. And it's important to realize that, people may question, well, why not just wait until the market comes up? Because when you're feeding an animal, it costs about $3 a day per head to feed that animal. And so every dollar you're waiting, you don't know if the market's going to come up or it's going to go lower. And so sooner or later, people just have to bite the bullet, because most ranchers are leveraged by the banks. And, you're just kind of praying that it works out, because it's such a big gamble. And it's really an interesting dynamic with how, like, these global companies, and then the legislation that we see being passed or done away with. And I look at it and I'm like, man, like I'm an American and I'm a proud American. And I look at what's going on with these global companies, and it's to my detriment. Back in, I think it was 2012, we had this thing called country of origin labeling that was introduced, so that if you're a consumer, the packaging had to dictate where this meat was coming from. And so if it came from a different nation, it had to be declared on the packaging. And over that course of 3 years, while it was rolling, we had awesome prices, man. Everybody was kicking butt. You know, people were growing. There was money in agriculture. And then in 2015, they did away with that. And it hasn't been the same since. So like what we have happening right now is beef can be, you know, brought in from one of 18 different countries, and they bring them into a cut plant. All they have to do is break the cryo bag, re-cryo it, and then they can pass this off at the grocery store as a product of America. And so it's just, you know, so much of it is just like kind of a play on words, but it's not helping us. We raise the best cattle in the United States, or in the world for that matter. We have really high quality food safety regulations and all of that. And all these other countries, you know, you don't know what they're doing. They're definitely, you know, subject to some regulations, but it's not on par with what the United States has got going.
Yeah, and not to mention that it probably costs more, you know, it costs more to produce the beef under the more strict regulations that the U.S. Tends to have. Yeah, that's one of the things that I've seen many folks complain about the cool law, you know, or the M-cool law, you know, the mandatory country of origin labeling law. And I know that's back up for sort of consideration, you know, perhaps it'll go through again. I don't know. One of the things that, you know, you told me, and I was, you know, I'd seen unique to Wyoming was, I think it was called the Food Freedom Act. And we had discussed that. And you said you actually knew a local representative or politician that got that through, and that greatly benefited both the consumer and the rancher. It was a nice relationship where it made it easier for you to sell direct to consumer. They actually got better prices. You guys got paid a little better. And that there was some pushback against that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I would say that, you know, it was an awesome step. Tyler Linden was one of our state reps. He just pushed that thing through, and that was amazing. It was a really good step, but it needs to go further. You know, it's interesting when you talk about health and food, and you know, out here in Wyoming, you just have these little towns, but it's I guess depending on where you're at with what you consider food and what's health and what's food and what's pharmacy, there is a very, it's not a very strong, there's not a lot of education. I mean, the majority, it's a food desert. There's most stuff is just the, you know, kind of fried food. And people are really watch those dollars, and we can't, as a producer, I'm small, so I can't compete with the you know, these giant packers who are doing it, you know, at such volume, and they're doing it at a huge volume, but at a very tight margin. So for me, I have to come in and I'm like, hey, my hamburger, if I'm going to sell it direct to somebody, is going to be around, you know, $4.50 a pound. You know, if you come and pick it up minus, you know, the shipping. And people look at that and they're like, well, you know, the grocery store stuff's $2. And so there's this education that needs to evolve as far as like looking at food as pharmacy, and like, where was that meat raised? Like, do you know anybody that, you know, that had their hands in that? You know, how many animals are ground into that meat? You know, I was doing some research, knowing that I was going to be on your podcast. I wanted to sound smart, so I was like, I got to get some, you know, statistics, you know, and data. And I looked back that, you know, I think it was like in the 1930s, there was, I think the average family income spent on food was around 35%, and now we're spending. In 1980 or in the 60s, it was 17%. And now we're down to around 10% of the family income is spent on food. And half of that is spent in restaurants and fast food, you know? And I feel that the people that are taking the brunt of this are the people in agriculture. Like, we feed the world. and I don't care if you're raising soybeans or whatever, we feed the world, but we have to be able to do it at a profit. And one of the really it's kind of a downer, but one of the things that I stumbled on is that in 1980, there was 1.3 million ranchers in the United States. And now we're at 700,000. And we're losing like 17,000 ranchers a year. And this is like the big picture is, and I look at all the stuff, the legislation that's coming down the tube, and it's like, this is going to get worse. You know, ranching is a legacy business. You know, it's passed from generation to generation. And what we see is, you know, you can't, with the rise, you know, especially after COVID right now, everybody's moving to the West and wants to get out of the cities. So the price of land is going through the roof. Even before this happened, this pandemic, you couldn't purchase a ranch and pay for it with the amount of food you could produce off of it. And now there's this, they just changed the death tax. It used to be if you had a ranch, you know, and it was worth, you know, 20 million bucks, you could write off $11 million of that. They just moved it down to 5 million bucks. So most ranchers are capital rich, but money poor. And then if they go to pass it on to the next generation and they don't have the legalities and the paperwork all put together, which most of these old people, you know, they don't really pay a whole lot of attention to it because they're they're busy doing the day-to-day and the monotonous work. They're going to have to pay 45% on anything over 5 million bucks. And so we're going to see this whole thing is going to get sped up as far as like, who's going to raise the food? You know, the average farmer and rancher is 60 years old, and the future of that just continues to look bleaker and bleaker. And I just think it's something that people need to be aware of as of the plight. And that's kind of like our cause is like, we have a beef company, we want to sell meat, you know, to support ourselves. But you know, don't support me. Go find somebody local. Like the people that are raising food, they need you, because the whole process is really tied together with these like global and multinational corporations. Is you have the big packers who have got contracts with the food distribution people, who have got contracts with these like large hotel chains, you know, because we sell meat all over in Jackson Hole. And I approach these guys and they're like, well, you know, we can only deviate from our contract like 10%. So the bulk of their food has to go through these certain channels, and they set the price. So we've got one market. Other than these little niche markets, we've got one market that the average farmer and rancher can sell into, and they tell you what you're going to get. It's not driven by demand as much as I think they would like you to believe.
Yeah, and you know, I've certainly seen many ranchers, you know, talking about the packers, you know, sort of manipulating and dominating the beef situation here in the United States, you know, to their benefit. You know, their beef prices can be high to the consumer, but ranchers are getting paid the very bottom dollar they can possibly get out of you guys, and that's, you know, unfortunate. You know, just to back to your friend, you know, the Representative Tyler Linden, I guess, Linden, who passed that. Now, you said that perhaps the beef industry put up a bunch of money to oppose his reelection, and they put millions of dollars to not have him elected because what he did was perhaps not generally beneficial for the Packers, I suppose. Is that something
I think that there was, and I don't know this, you know, from speaking to him, but kind of the general consensus in the communities, you know, it's like, look, Wyoming's small. There's only, you know, 600,000 of us or something. So everybody knows everybody, but he did an awesome job. And, you know, there was a lot of money thrown at his, I feel like there was a lot of money thrown at his campaign to get him out, because of what he was trying to do in the food industry. And it really, you know, it opened the doors with the laws that he changed that we can sell, you know, a lot of products. You still can't sell beef, you know, harvested beef. Everything has to be inspected, and the food safety and all of that. But as far as, you know, eggs and milk, it really, it took a lot of the hooks out so that people can go direct to the consumer and sell their product.
Let me ask you about so back to what you're doing. You've got one of the things. So in Colorado, you may have been aware, that their governor was like, Vegan Day was last month, and then Wyoming turned around and said, no, we're going to make it a meat hearty day. I can't remember the name of your governor. And then Montana did something similar, and so did Nebraska and Iowa and Oklahoma. They all jumped in there, and there may have been others that did that, but those are the ones I were aware of. They all were kind of came out at least superficially saying we support our ranchers. Now, you'd like to see more teeth and like them actually pass legislation other than just saying, March 20th is Eat More Meat Day. That's great to hear, but I mean, I think you have to go beyond that, and you have to do things to make it better for you guys. And one of the things that one of the bills that is being proposed in Colorado, and hopefully it won't pass. I think it probably won't, but it's being sponsored by some animal activists. Jared Polis, the governor, has got on his veterinarian board an animal activist who wants to define, artificial insemination as sexual molestation or some nonsense. It's just
Yeah.
ridiculous. And then they also want to regulate the slaughter age of animals and that sort of stuff. So there's obviously there are a lot of forces that would like to see you out of business. I mean, and I don't know if it's, the meat industry, the Packers want to just buy everybody's ranch up and then they can ranch where they want, and it's all going to be industrialized, super highly, profitable. I mean, this is the bottom line, is they cut the cost. Because you're right now, I think it seems like the ranchers are an inconvenience because there's the cost of goods sold, and if they ain't got to pay you guys, and they can maybe import foreign labor to run their ranches for cheap or something, they can make it even cheaper, perhaps. I don't know if do you see like you said, there used to be 1.3 million ranches in the U.S. Now we're down to 700,000 and dropping. What's going on with that land? Is it being converted to strip malls, or some of these big meat companies consolidating and using it? What's been happening with the land?
I think it's a little of everything. Typically what we see is, is people that have made a lot of money in another industry come in and try their hand at it. And, it's kind of like the joke is, you want to see somebody lose some money, watch a millionaire in the tech industry come in and try to be a rancher, and then their cows come in, there's just, you can't read it in a book and get it. You have to live it. And, but typically what you see is guys come in and they try their hand at it, and inevitably what happens is the production of the land goes down because it's just, they can't handle it. They do too much. They throw a $10 million house up, and then kind of farm it out for somebody else to manage it for them. But it's not efficient. And it drives the land taxes up for everybody that's around. And, it's just a very strange thing that we see happening, just north of here, we saw, some famous musician move in, and he's got an awesome vision, as far as, wants to build the community and do it, and just comes in hot and starts just making all these changes, but he doesn't really understand the soil and letting things kind of evolve and looking at nature and letting that kind of dictate, well, what's the move here, rather than just come in and, and just force it rather than let it flow. But we see a lot of that out here, just big money coming in and, just throwing up a nice house, and then they get a great view to drink some coffee in the morning. But the reality of it is, it comes down to the soil. And I think that's like we're talking about beef, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to the soil. And I don't understand this plan of action and legislation that's being introduced in Colorado. I mean, to me, it's just, it's hilarious, right? Because it's so crazy that you can't AI a cow. You can't preg test a cow. You can't measure the circumference, because like when you're testing bulls, they measure the circumference of their testicles to see if they're, you know, where they stack up, or is this going to be a viable sire? You can't castrate a bull calf. You know, they probably wouldn't even allow you to milk a cow. And when I've got a bum calf, but, you know, he needs some milk, man, you milk a cow. And for them to say that it's something sexual mistreatment, it's like, this is, yeah, it's just, there's something there. It's life, and we should value that, but it's not a person, you know. I mean, I just watch, we've got all these chickens running around out in the yard, and I watch how they treat each other, and it's like, this is just nature, you know, doing its thing. But for somebody that, first of all, doesn't understand it at a certain level, I think there's just this lack of education because they've never lived it, so they don't really understand what's going on there, and they can just stamp it sexual abuse or whatever they're calling it. It's just, it's ridiculous, you know. I mean, we had I love animals, and we had this turkey, you know, sitting that we harvested all the male turkeys last year, last fall, and we had this one hen turkey, and so she's just like hanging out, but they always they live right in front of the door, is where this, we called her Helga because she looked like this little Romanian lady with her feathers hanging down. But every night I'd come home and I'd have to step over Helga to, you know, to get in the house, and then in the morning there's this giant turkey present. So I went to pick her up and just like gingerly move her around, and I love this turkey. And so I was like, I picked her up and I was walking around. She was probably, I don't know, 30 pounds. And as I'm moving her, I didn't have her wings restrained properly, and she like flapped her wings and then hits me in the throat, and I just like, I buckle, and I drop this poor turkey that I love. And then all of a sudden she's like, I don't know if it broke her leg or what happened, but now she's just like, she's maimed. And I was like, I felt terrible because it was my fault. If I just sucked it up and stepped over the turkey poop the rest of my life, we'd still have her. So it's like, well, I love this turkey in life, so we butchered her because you know, I love her in death too. It's like, she's gonna, all that love we put into her and all that health, like that's gonna come into my body, and it's okay. Like, people need to like go out and watch what a pack of wolves does to a moose or an elk. And like, we've just gotten so soft that, I mean, people are more afraid to live than they are to die right now. Like, it's like this thing about like death is that it's just this bad thing. And it's like, man, that's the way it is. Are you going to spend your whole life worrying about this, or, you know, get busy living? It's just, I can't even, I don't think like that. So I can't even really relate. It seems that like people need to do hard stuff, you know. And that's the interesting thing about ranchers is I share this mentality with a lot of these people because they've done hard things their whole life, and you learn how to just kind of suck it up, and it gives you a different perspective on life. That just, you know, hanging out and being comfortable, there's no growth there. Like, it's great and it's comfortable, but it's pretty hollow, really. So I don't know. I like animals, but I don't have a problem harvesting because the intent is good. You know, it's just, we're dirt. You know, some people say like we're just stardust because we're all made up of the same thing on like a quantum physics level. You know, it's just, it's energy. And so, you know, it's just the cycling of that. But to put these emotions into it and say you can or cannot do that, I mean, I appreciate your perspective, but like, we're going to have to agree to disagree with a lot of these people, and hopefully some education comes around. I'd encourage anybody that doesn't get it, man, like, come out, we'll show you. And because I've had a lot of individuals come through the ranch, and, you know, they've been, as far as the political spectrum goes, they've been, you know, here or there, wherever. But after spending like, you know, a month out here, it changes people profoundly, you know, just to see guys come out and, you know, the most menial task. You can't have people that don't have a background in these things go do the important job. It's like these menial tasks, like today, you're going to dig a hole in the ground and you're going to put a post in it. And there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And so once you get people trained up, what you see is like, just by simply putting it's a piece of wood and you put it in the ground, but you see individuals who've never had to do that physical manual labor, and they get a blister on their hand and they had sweat run off their nose for the first time. And then, they're proud of it. You hit the post and it doesn't move. And they're like, so many of these guys are like, I remember the first post that I put in the ground, because you did that, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the fact that we tend to be getting soft as a society, and it's one. I think one of the main problems we have here is people are too comfortable, and they're not willing to, you know, sacrifice or risk that comfort level to stand up for freedoms and rights. And I think that's very unfortunate. We see these, when things get bad in these countries and you have a bunch of people that are starving, they rise up as a mass, and you know, they affect change. Whereas when everybody's just kind of comfortable watching Netflix and sitting around eating donuts and, they don't want to do anything. They're just lazy. They become soft and lazy. And as long as they continue to get their cheap food and cheap entertainment, they're kind of good. And so that's what that's the kind of inertia you're battling against in a lot of cases. Let me ask you about, at the beginning you said, you go down to southern Wyoming and you see all these cows that look like fat cows, that's ready for slaughter type of stuff. Are you, up where you are, you're keeping them for longer? Are you using special breeds, or is it just a variety of different animal that you have up there?
I mean, we raise black Angus, there's a lot of good breeds out there. It's kind of like you drive a Ford or a Dodge. A lot of people have got their own opinions about that, but in my opinion, I think as far as like the country that we run in, they have to be a pretty tough animal. They have to be able to climb mountains and, walk through mud and do that. And I think that an Angus it's a great all around animal.
Yeah, my understanding is the Angus, particularly the black, is going to do better in the colder weather than, you see some of them in Texas, in hot parts of Texas, and that may not be the best choice. Well, it's a very popular breed, as far as, everybody thinks black Angus, you're going to get this super cut of meat. And there's people that have, said like that's a good animal for cold weather. And obviously, and obviously Wyoming's cold. I lived up there. I know it snows, it gets cold, and so how do you deal with the weather up there with the animals?
you just kind of take it on the chin and hope that it doesn't last for too long. Winter's pretty tough. I remember, I love technology, because I remember as a kid, going out and feeding cows with my dad, and we had these little bales, so they weighed like 80 pounds a piece, and we'd feed 500 cows, and you'd pick each bale up, load it on the truck, drive out into the cows, get the bungee cord out. And so you just set the vehicle on a trajectory and jump out and then hop on the back with your knife and start cutting hay bale and just flake them off. And I remember that it used to take us till 11 o'clock every morning. And then we'd go to town, but the cows would eat before we did. We'd go to town and we'd get, just like a big old greasy bacon and eggs or whatever. But hydraulics have just revolutionized it. And so like where we're at now with our feeding program is it takes so much energy and time to bale hay. There's like this window. You can't put it up too wet or it'll mold. You can't put it up too dry, or else you'll lose a lot of the nutrition. The leaves will break off, and if you're seeing a lot of dust behind your baler, you're just losing the best part of it. So we went over to there's a local kid here who does a great job, and so it's kind of like when they make silage out of corn. You see these giant corn choppers. We do the same thing. We just cut the hay down and then bring these choppers in, and they chop it up real fine, and then we put it in a big pit. So it's basically, a mix of pasture and grasses and legumes, that are fermented into a big pile. So then now I'm getting smarter every year. So we come in and just make this thing work for us. So you grab the tractor, load it in the feed truck, and you can just go out and feed it. And the animals love it because it's warm, it's kind of composting, fermenting. And so you see it in the cold days, it's just steaming. So the animals really appreciate that. And, I think one of the biggest things is, you are what you eat. So if the cows have got to be eating healthy food, which, that's all dictated by the soil, and you've got to feed the soil, which we kind of experimented. There was a drought. So certain times of the year, you don't want your animals out on your fields because it's muddy and they're sinking in the mud and really just kind of detrimental to the plant roots and the growth. So we'll kind of, I would say you don't really want to say confine, but they can't get out. But and most of the time, if you open the gate, the cows don't want to leave anyway. So it's important to have them in a really good bedding so that they're dry. And we went out, there was a drought, so there wasn't much straw. Typically we would bed them in some straw, some fallow from some grain production on one of the neighboring farms. But there was a drought, so I was driving behind these grocery stores and I see like all these bales of cardboard boxes. And so I got a semi-load of those and we ground it up and started bedding the animals in these cardboard boxes. And then that kind of took on a life of its own when we started researching like climate change and, what happens to the manure, what it needs, how do you make compost, how do you make fertilizer? And so what happens is when a cow defecates on the ground, there's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in it, but it's not stable. So it needs to bind with some sort of carbon in order to make it stable. And we found that cardboard boxes have got 400 times more carbon in them than a pound of, the representative proportion of straw. So all of a sudden we're like, well, this is really cool and we're getting it for free. And so we started doing that. And at the same time, we had a recycling program 30 miles away, which is where all the garbage is taken to. And they did away with the recycling program because it was so costly. Like it wasn't feasible for them to continue to do it. So then you have, I picked up that winter, I picked up 400,000 pounds of cardboard boxes and bedded our animals in it. And so these boxes, what are the other options for these boxes? Nobody was taking them at the time. And so they were just going to take up landfill space, which is, if you're into the whole climate change thing and, CO2 is the bad word, well then methane's even worse. So I think it's NH3. So when you bury when you bury these boxes, they have to break down anything that's cellulose has to go through this methane process first, if I'm understanding it correctly. And that's like 20 times worse for the environment as far as carbon production and carbon emissions. So we're actually solving one industry's problem. What do we do with all these boxes? And taking it, composting, creating manure or creating fertilizer out of this stuff and feeding our soil with it and increasing the biodiversity in the bacteria in the soil, because that's what bacteria really needs is the carbon as their food source. So we're looking at the whole thing as if your soil is healthy, everything that transpires after that, the grass is healthy, the cows are healthy, the human is healthy. And it's just kind of a weird thing that, I read something that if you were to take a handful of healthy soil and look at it, there's more life in a handful of soil than everything above ground. 90% of life is in the soil. And what we see, the trees, the elephants, the cows, the people, that only accounts for 10% of it. And I know just enough about this stuff to kind of be dangerous and talk about it, but I mean, people need to educate themselves. I mean, there's a guy out there right now, this Dr. Zach Bush, who's really put soil and human health under the microscope, and the correlations between bacteria and this whole approach to human health is, it's like, when is the last time you ate a carrot that had dirt on it? You know, it's like dirty is a bad word. Oh, you have dirt on your shirt. Like, we're directed to steer away from that, when maybe, you know, being dirty is not necessarily a bad thing. I'd rather be dirty than be sterile. Like, there's nothing in nature that's sterile. Like, it doesn't exist. Nature is dirty, and at the end of the day, we're just nature.
Well, that sentiment is not shared by a lot of people right now. You know, it's wash hands, hand sanitizers everywhere. You know, spray down counters. You know, it's you know you know, I just wonder what that effect's going to have on people's immune system long term, if we're negatively impacting that, because we do depend on some of this stuff. You know, let me just ask you about the soil. Are you able to, since you've adopted this sort of regenerative style of agriculture, have you noticed a change in the local soil where you're at?
Yeah, we work with the University of Wyoming, and we've been doing soil tests, and we're just kind of in the preliminary stages of that. But I mean, from what we've come up with, you know, our initial data is comparing our irrigated ground that we've been composting and feeding. It's so, there's so much more carbon and biological activity in it than there is in the same land that's just outside of the field. It's alive, and you can go stick a shovel in it, and you see, you know, there's earthworms, and there's just a lot of activity in it. And you know, that's a great thing in nature, is biodiversity.
Let me, you know, because we're going low on time. Let me ask you about, you know, again, if people want to support you guys or what you're doing up there with the meat company, how do they get a hold of you? How do they? I guess your preference is to sell locally, I guess, but are you guys available for out of state?
Yeah, we ship nationally. We've got the website. Our website is cartercountrymeats.com. We've got a YouTube channel. You know, the whole social thing is very strange. I don't like it, but it's definitely a tool to get us out there. We've got a YouTube channel, Carter Country Meats, and an Instagram account, Carter Country Meats.
Yeah, unfortunately, like I said, this social media stuff is kind of a necessary evil these days, and I think it's something that we have to participate in. I think, you know, the days of just ignoring stuff is a problem, because you see what happens when you ignore things. The people that want to dictate their particular beliefs on you tend to be able to do that, and so I think we can't do that anymore. Um, what you know, as far as ordering meat from you guys, is it, you know, can you guys get, is it sides of beef, quarters and stuff like that, or can you get individual cuts, or how does it work?
Yeah, we've got individual cuts. You know, really what we focused on when we started out, we were really just in the wholesale industry, and then this COVID hit. So everything just turned off, and we were struggling big time. So we started a direct to consumer model, but we wanted it to be like, these things have to work for ranchers first. So we came up with uh, base boxes that are very similar to a half a beef, a quarter of a beef. But you know, the tricky thing in the cities, and people don't necessarily have a lot of freezer space, is, you know, what do you do with, where are you going to put a half a beef if you live in an apartment? So we broke these we call them bighorn boxes. So you can get a 5, 10, 20-pound box that's representative of basically what comes off of the whole animal. So we broke down, this is the amount of, our tier 1 is ribeyes, strip loins, and tenderloins, and then the different cuts. So it's representative of the whole animal. And we're working on getting a carnivore box out, because it's, you know, we had a interesting conversation with a guy who purchased our meat, and he's a carnivore, and he's like, man, I love your product. I just feel another level of health in my body, but I need more fat. And so we started taking the kidney fat, the tallow, and just putting, you know, little quarter-pound packages of beef tallow, and kind of catering to to that need. And I mean, I encourage, I'm not here to, like, we love to sell our meat, but I encourage people to, like, it's expensive, you know, shipping meat and boxes and insulation and drive, like, it's expensive. But find your local people, man. They're there. And, you know, we're trying with these older animals is we're just really trying to push the limits and set the bar as far as the health. And if a person is keying on, you know, animal fats and protein as their nutrition, I think it's important to know that it's as clean as it can be, and that, you know, there's no poison in it. And that's, you know, I just encourage everybody, like, try a brick of our hamburger and then go get something from the grocery store and just, you know, try it.
Yeah, and I've actually some of the facts, because I've got, you know, some of the beef, and I've got some of the fat actually thawing out right now that I'm gonna have this morning as part of my meal today. So that's interesting. Let me ask you about, again, one of the problems people will cite is to raise these animals to 5 years, 6 years, 7 years costs a lot more money than to raise them to two. So how do you get around that? I mean, how do you manage that? Is it just because the feed costs aren't that much higher, or because, you know,
No,
like you mentioned, you know, $3 a day for every animal you got. If you got to feed them for an extra 3 years, that's a hell of a lot of money.
well, what we're doing is we're historically a cow-calf operation. So what these animals are is these are animals that have been breeding and contributing to the calf production. And once they don't breed back, then we send them out for another year. So they just kind of get a free pass on the range to just put fat on them. Because if you were to take that same animal and, you know, sell her into the commodity beef industry, she's worth, you know, depending on the timing, but, you know, 40 cents a pound. So it's to our advantage to try to add value to them any way we can.
So you guys purchase these older cows that have done calving, you know, maybe they're 6, 7 years old, bring them in, feed them up for a year, and then you turn them into a higher quality product. Is that basically the model?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we purchase some of them, but the majority of them we raise here on the ranch. But, you know, we've been very transparent that, like, we don't sell just our cows. You know, we've got our friends and our neighbors, and it's like, my cows aren't any better than anybody else's. It's like my neighbor's cows. It's what they eat. That's what, like, protein's protein, but, like, the flavors in the fat, and the nutrition and the health is in that fat. And so we purchase animals from people who operate in a similar fashion and in the same geographical area, because this is up here, it's cow country. You know, it's just, there's a lot of grass, and, you know, we've got really amazing water. It's a very high alkalinity. And, you know, when you start thinking of, like, how much water is in meat, you know, I think all of those things contribute to the health qualities of it. And, you know, these older animals are more nutrient dense, and the flavor of them is it's just different. And I don't want to talk bad about other industry, you know, my brothers and sisters in other parts. You know, if you're corn finishing or whatever, hey, that's awesome. We're just trying to push things and come up with something new, which it's not even new. Like, this is the way it used to be done. Everything that's like this whole woke, you know, regenerative agriculture, this isn't a new thing. Like, this is how it used to be done until we came into this, you know, this new age after World War II and started, you know, chemicals, and, you know, we started creating all these problems, and then started putting Band-Aids over everything with, you know, another chemical. And it's just, it's a really, really strange thing, you know, to see. I just question how much of this food industry is driven by dollars versus by common sense. You know, when you research, like, how did we get to this place, and find that, you know, after World War II, you know, people were encouraged to have their victory gardens, and 45% of the food was raised in people's backyards. And then we had the Dust Bowl, and the, you know, we had these giant petrochemical companies that there was nothing to produce for the war, and they just kind of shifted gears and started focusing on agriculture and just pumping these synthetic chemicals into the ground to just start growing, mass production. And that's where things really started to deteriorate. And you look at, I think it was like in 1964, there was like degenerative health diseases in 4% of the population. And you fast forward to now, and 45% of our teenagers have got some kind of disease diagnosis. And you're like, well, there had to something changed, And to me, it all comes back to the food, and at the end of the day, the soil. And people just need to, be conscious of that. And you are what you eat.
Yeah, that's a great sentiment to end on. Unfortunately, I have to run. Thank you so much, Carter Country Meat. You guys support them. I'll see you guys back tomorrow. You guys take care now. Bye bye, everybody.